Hi everyone, Woody back analyzing Andy Davis's awesome article, Shearwater Dive Computer Settings, Become a Power User. You needed to watch all of the previous videos in order to get to the place where we are at now in Andy's article. He is now talking about the relationship between gradient factor 99 and surface gradient factor. This is super cool. This is where shearwater really becomes powerful. See, the computer's not going to lock you out like some other computers do if you happen to exceed its recommended levels if you're using gradient factors. It's going to let you drive the dive, for lack of a better word. But you need to know what is happening within the decompression model as you're driving that dive. Are you ascending too quickly? Are you moving up to a level that you should not be at? Is your gradient factor low really better to set super low? Because yes, the leading fast tissues may be off gassing, but what about the slower other 15 tissue levels? They're on gassing, which gets into a giant discussion on deep stops. Are they good? Are they bad? Should gradient factor low be 30, 40, 50 or higher? Because that gradient factor low is controlling those deep stops. That's the conversation of the previous videos. Right? One thing that we know is it's not a definite. Don't let anybody out there say, oh my goodness, you have to be at gradient factor 40. Really? Maybe, but maybe not. How is it affecting you and your body? They don't know. It's theoretical. But it is interesting to understand what the dive computer is telling you. So in this section, he describes the information provided by gradient factor 99 and surface gradient factor as you progress through various phases of the dive. So we're going to go on a dive. We're going to go on his dive. It's really cool. So the following example that I'm going to discuss, that he discusses, is for a no-stop dive to 100 feet with 18 minutes of planned bottom time. This example assumes a preset default conservatism of a 40-85 gradient factor setting. Okay, and this is purely for illustrative purposes. I'm not here telling you you should dive that or you should change that. I'm here just teaching you how to read the information. Everybody out there that knows a ton more about this than me, I'm not here to make an opinion. I'm here to simply say, this is the information that the computer is displaying. Kind of cool to know that for every diver. Okay, so here we go. Ready? This is really cool. Andy, man, your article is just jam up. Everybody look at this. It says gradient factor 99 during your descent is indicating that you're absorbing nitrogen. So no nitrogen is yet absorbed. Your surface gradient factor remains 0. You're on gassing during the descent. Pretty straightforward. That's what your computer would look like. Right? On gassing makes sense. So I'm wondering, by the way, is this all coming out backwards on the video? I hope not. In terms of me shining it to the front of the screen. Okay, moving on to the bottom time. As time passes at the bottom depths, you're continuing to absorb nitrogen. The surface gradient factor, in other words, if you were to go directly to the surface from this point in this no deco dive, the surface gradient factor would be going up, obviously because you're taking on nitrogen. In some of your tissues, the leading, quicker tissues first. The deeper you are, the faster that surface gradient factor will rise. and the no decompression limit is 20 minutes. That's what it looks like on the computer. You're still on gassing during your bottom time. Surface gradient factor is moving up. Here's your no decompression limit. You could be at this depth, I think this is meters, for 20 minutes and still be able to go directly to the surface. Your total time to the surface is 3 minutes. It tells you if you were to go directly to the surface, you could get there in 3 minutes and stay within the no decompression limit. At the end of your bottom time, time to come up, the most depressing part of the dive, after 18 minutes in the bottom, you're still absorbing more nitrogen. Over the time, your surface gradient factor during that time has risen to 75%. Because you're closer to your preset gradient factor high of 85%, there's less NDL remaining. You had set your gradient factor high to 85%. You're at 75%, so your NDL is lower. You still can go directly to the surface. Your total time to the surface is 3 minutes. You're still on gassing. Time to ascend. We're at the start of the ascent. As you first leave the bottom, there is no yet difference between the pressure of nitrogen in your body and the ambient pressure of the water. So, gradient factor 99 says 0. You're in equilibrium. You're not taking on more, well, you are taking on more gas if you stay there. Your surface gradient factor is 75%. You're still at the point of being able to go directly to the surface in 3 minutes. Okay, that's right at the start of your ascent. Now, during the ascent, here we go. As you ascend, the water pressure around you decreases. So the gradient factor 99 rises. Bubbles are starting to come out. And you're supersaturated on A tissue, leading tissue. Higher gradient factor 99 indicates, and you know you are because of your surface gradient factor. A higher gradient factor 99, faster removal of nitrogen from your body. So the more this rises as you go up, then that's faster removal of nitrogen for your body. It's like a gradient factor speedometer. Make sense? So we're watching this number and saying, all right, how fast do I want to remove nitrogen from my body? How is that impacting surface gradient factor? And you can control that. Should your gradient factor 99 be higher than 10%? Lower than 10%? You got to look at that. He puts in some rules of thumbs and says to try to have your gradient factor 99 at about half of your high gradient factor. See what happens at the start of the safety stop now. As you reach your safety stop at, here it says at 16 feet, your gradient factor has risen to 30%. This is an effective amount of supersaturation to quickly remove nitrogen from your body. The surface gradient factor has only dropped 1% over less than 3 minutes of an ascent. So you're still almost at the same surface gradient factor if you were to go directly to the surface at this point. Now you've come to the end of your safety stop. Here we go. After 3 minutes has elapsed, your gradient factor 99 is reduced. This is because your body's released nitrogen during the safety stop. Simultaneously, says that release of nitrogen has lowered your surface gradient factor. You've had some benefit of your safety stop. So if you get to the surface now, you're only going to be at a 64% gradient factor. In essence, the safety stop added 10% more conservatism to your dive. So there was a benefit of doing the safety stop. So when people tell you, I hear it all the time, well, you don't really need to do a safety stop in a no decompression dive. Well, you do. I mean, you should. Maybe it's not going to benefit you, but it's going to, maybe it's not going to keep you from getting bent, but maybe it is. That's what I meant to say, because Who knows on a given day what surface gradient factor you need to be at? Who knows? Who knows? One day it could be fine. You get to the surface at your high gradient factor and you're totally fine. Another day you do the same dive. Maybe you didn't hydrate as much. Maybe you didn't feel as good. Maybe you're more out of shape. And then you get bent. Who knows? So be more conservative and you can control that. That's all I'm trying to say here. You can know what your surface gradient factor is going to be when you get to the surface. Maybe you just don't feel good. Maybe you just underwater are like, you know what, I want to go a little slower. Now you're surfacing from the dive, and I would recommend go very, very slow from the safety stop. 10 feet per minute. I totally agree with that. This is going to be a massive decrease in pressure. It reduces quickly as you surface. As a result, the gradient factor 99 is going to spike quickly because you're really decreasing that pressure in the last 20 feet of your dive. So it's going to spike. And when you get to the surface, your surface gradient factor 99 and your gradient factor 99 and your surface gradient factor are going to match at the surface. So, what is this all telling you? Because that's the bottom line. That's how I'm going to end this. I can use gradient factor 99 while watching my no decompression limit and watching my surface gradient factor to drive the dive with a shearwater computer. That's so awesome. It is not hard set to say, well, I want my low gradient factor to be as low as possible because I just know that's more conservative. That's not true necessarily. Is a low gradient factor 30 better than a low gradient factor of 40? I don't know. I don't think anybody does. I'm sorry to say. You know, the low gradient factor setting is going to drive those deep stops. But for these no decompression limit dives, where you can go to the surface at any point during your dive, looking at gradient factor 99 and following Andy's general rule of thumb, which says try to keep that gradient factor 99, that speedometer of gradient factors, at about half of what you have your high gradient factor set at, which is the gradient factor that's going to allow you to get to the surface, is a pretty good conservative rule of thumb. And watch how that impacts your surface gradient factor. Obviously, if you go from 20 feet and then finish your safety stop at 10 feet, that gradient factor 99 is going to go higher. So it does not mean that you should absolutely get to the depth to where your gradient factor 99 is half your gradient factor. I know I'm going to get those comments. Let me stop the comments right now, because maybe you cannot maintain neutral buoyancy at 10 feet. Maybe there's surge in the water. Maybe as you're going up as a new diver, you're going to blow right past that 10 feet and blow the whole concept of driving the dive, controlling the dive by having your surface gradient factor 99 at approximately half of what your high gradient factor setting is on your dive computer, which is like really optimal level of off-gassing. So you're lowering that surface gradient factor at the most optimal place in the water column. That's not easy to do. There's nothing wrong, at all, zero wrong with following the conservative default settings in shearwater, doing your normal safety stop at 20 feet, keeping a nice buffer in the water column, and not blowing through that safety stop. But safety stops do matter. They absolutely will lower your surface gradient factor. These are theoretical models that say you should be able to go to the surface if you're in a no decompression limit dive from any point in the dive. You should be able to. No guarantee. Many people have done that and stayed within their no decompression limit and got bent when they got to the surface. I can tell you in my case, I followed the dive computer and even added a buffer and still had a problem. Okay, this is just another video about understanding the information the computer is giving you. And Andy did a great job, everybody, of just showing you here's the information the computer has available for you to look at, and here's what it means. More examples to come. Bye, everybody.